It's my pleasure now to welcome on the founder of Youngblood Media, Callum MacPherson. Cal, how are you doing today, mate?
Great, man. Thanks heaps for having me on. Excited to have a chat and be on the other side of the mic for a change. It's always good.
Yeah, no, absolutely, mate. I'm thrilled for you to come on because, you know, you do a lot of great stuff and I have a lot of admiration for the podcast you do and sort of how you go about it. So I'm looking forward to jumping into it. But before we do that and get into Youngblood Media and all the super stuff you do there, tell us who Callum is.
Shit, start with the deep questions, bro.
I love to do that sometimes.
So I suppose most relevant to all this sort of stuff, I'm the founder of a podcast called Youngblood Men's Health Matters, and that sits within my business, which is Youngblood Media, which is really creating video content based around positive mental health and telling inspiring stories. We do that through making mini documentaries, the podcast, and increasingly in-person workshops, working with schools, that sort of thing as well. So that's really my passion. It all comes from a background of being a journalist and a television reporter. So did that at uni, did 4 years volunteering at a radio station back in my uni days, getting up, reading the news early in the morning on one of those community stations. I was that guy with the croaky voice, nervously reading out the news in the mornings, and started doing my own stories about Adelaide, my city, when I was working there. And that was probably the first time I got interested in telling stories and the power of storytelling. Got all the way through uni, didn't really know what I was going to do at that point. I was never dead set on being a reporter or being a journalist. I sort of just played to whatever my strengths were. Started off doing law because everyone told me that was a good idea. Realized I absolutely hated that, but I was somewhat good at talking, terrible at maths. So like, what can you do? Both my parents are teachers. So thinking about like what I can do with my life. And yeah, through the volunteer radio stuff, ended up getting a shot to go and do a week as an intern doing TV reporting in a country town. End of that week, someone quit, and then I got the call up to go and move 8 hours away to a country town to start being a TV reporter, where I was a one-man news crew doing the filming, the editing, the reporting, finding the stories. I was 22. It was my first job, like professional job. So I had no idea that I was actually doing the job of about 10 people, which I learned as I climbed further up the ladder. So that was real tough. Port Lincoln here in South Australia. So it's a pretty nice place. It's like 12,000 people. It's the nicest one of our country towns, probably. It's by the seaside, but being a city boy, it was pretty isolating being out there. Not comfortable. There was only ever 1 or 2 places available to rent. I lived in a motel room for like 2 months with a share kitchen with a stove that I had to plug into the wall. Had to build my own wardrobe everywhere I went because nowhere even had wardrobe. Slept on mattresses on the floor and stuff. So it wasn't super bad, but sort of did it quite tough there compared to getting looked after by my mum as I did coming up to that point. But anyway, that's where I started.
Port Lincoln Tourism isn't going to be reaching out to you anytime soon, I don't think.
Yeah, just shout on Port Lincoln. No, it's actually a beautiful place to go and visit, and people do rant and rave about it. But yeah, I think I'm just more of a city boy at heart, so it was a bit of a struggle. But on a serious note, the tough part about working in the country and working far away from home is just the isolation of it and being away from your family and friends with no way of actually going and seeing them in person. So I always found that pretty tough, that you couldn't just go and have a beer with your friend, or you couldn't go to mum and dad's house to get a dinner cooked for you, and it was just all on you all the time. But anyway, it made me grow up pretty quickly, which I probably needed to at that point, because it was a good time for me to pull my head in. I was partying pretty hard throughout uni and probably not the most focused, and probably pretty fortunate to graduate with a degree and end up with a job, I'd say, given my level of effort at times. So anyway, long story short, did Port Lincoln for like 8 months, went to Townsville in North Queensland, did a year and a half there with a small news team, then came back to Adelaide and did a couple of years reporting here, doing largely overnight crime stuff. Countless stories of stabbings and armed robberies and fires and that sort of thing. And that all got pretty repetitive after a while. A lot of fatal car accidents, real sad stuff, having to harass people on the worst day of their lives and not feeling that great about that. Really got to me after a while. And then one day I was halfway through a shift in the morning and I got a call from someone I know saying that one of my mates had just committed suicide, which really rocked my world. And I just remember being in disbelief when I got that phone call, and initially thinking that I was just going to finish my shift and get back to work, and then went into shock, which I've never experienced before, where started shaking and tearing up, and it's really quite a crazy thing to feel. I'm sure most people have, or a lot of people have felt that before, but it's really overwhelming and intense. And my cameraman actually had to just drive me home that day, and I just remember being in bits for a couple of days after that, and then having never lost someone suddenly, and certainly not to suicide, experiencing the grief of that and the waves of grief that came with that, and trying to interpret what had happened was an extremely difficult process to go through. And going to the funeral and seeing how devastated everyone was, and seeing how many people my friend James had in his life who loved him, but he had gone and isolated himself in another state and wasn't able to see or feel that all these people were there for him. And I think because he was isolated, he convinced himself he was a burden, or he wasn't good enough, wasn't living up to his own standards. And what I've learned through my work and what I've seen with the experience of others, that isolation is just so dangerous, not having people there physically to pull you out of these sorts of head spins that you can easily get into. And that ended in tragedy. So after that, living through that experience, I was really thinking about how can I use my skills and my storytelling to tell stories that I think actually matter, and spark some more conversation around mental health for young men in particular, because it struck me that a large problem that contributed to my friend's death was him feeling like he couldn't fully open up, even though I was closer to him than most. And we would have long phone calls pretty regularly where he would get pretty deep. I still had no idea that it was to the extent that it was. And it was a complete shock to me. And then realizing that that's the case for so many people, and that just about everyone's touched by suicide in some way. So, started the podcast there almost 2 years ago now, interviewing young men from all around Australia about what they've been through in life pertaining to their mental health, all underpinned by suicide, but really just trying to find out what we've been through and show each other that we're not alone, and give us examples that, we're not freaks or outcasts, or although we're all different, we all go through similar things. So that's really become my driving passion and what I truly love doing. So that was a quick rundown. I'm sick of my own voice, man. I'll shut up for a second.
No, that was an incredible answer. You describe yourself as a storyteller. There's obviously a billion different ways that someone in the media can sort of go or narrow their focus, but what was it about storytelling that grabbed you?
I just think it's the most powerful thing in the world. I think it's something that bonds us so closely as human beings, and one of the pillars of human life that's always been there since the start of us. Basically, we've always known how to tell stories and relay what happened and talk about our feelings, and that's really so pivotal to creating a society that can grow and move forward. And without storytelling and understanding, you can't have compassion and love, and you can't have progress, and you can't have all the amazing things that we need more of in this world. And then, I don't know, I feel like I was sort of a born storyteller, that both mum and dad being English teachers, always lots of books around, always lots of stories being read to me, always liked telling a story as a kid, felt like I had a good knack for it. Words come fairly easily to me, liked writing. And then when I started to tell stories in a professional sense, the good stories where you feel like you really get someone's message across, portray them very strongly in a way that they deserve to be, and get their story out there for someone who otherwise might not to, and the impact that has on them. And then those who see that story, you might see that reaction in the comments of people talking about how whatever that story was so powerful, and that resonates for them, and that person who's the center of that story is so inspiring and deserves to have a platform. And I've always found that really rewarding. And like anyone, I think you just want to use whatever skills you have to be able to contribute whatever you can in this world. And I just found like that's my thing.
Do you feel a responsibility when you do have someone on your show to tell that story, as best as you can? That's going to sound silly, but I stress about this before I do every single interview.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if it's someone who hasn't told their story before or hasn't told it many times, perhaps feeling a bit nervous about it. A lot of the people that I do get on the show are already mental health advocates, already outspoken about their stories. So I know that they're going to be confident in talking and that they have taught it before. But yeah, I always feel that pressure because I'm always so appreciative that people want to give up their time for free to come on and tell me their story, talk so openly about the deepest, darkest shit they've been through in their life, stuff that's not easy to talk about. And for the greater good, they're willing to come and share that on my platform. So yeah, absolutely feel pressure and feel the need to get the most out of every interview that I do because I'm just so appreciative of the opportunity. But like you would know well yourself, it's always the guest and it's always the interviewee that drives the interview. And if you've got a good guest on the show, they really take the reins and they're the one who's driving it and you're just the one sort of prompting them along. So it's harder today, me being the interviewee, and I guess you rely on me. I usually prefer sitting in your chair because I think it's actually an easier seat to sit in some ways. If you've got good talent on, you can just guide them, and I always want people to leave feeling like they've had sort of a cathartic experience and they've just left it all out there, and just remembering that it's never about me, it's always about them. The other people are the interesting part rather than making it about yourself,
It's funny, the way I describe it is, they drive the bus. I just make sure that, it goes to the right stops. I think the perfect example is I had a Scottish man, Brian Jeffrey, who has his own mental health service. And we spoke for almost 3 hours. And
Right.
I think I asked him a question. I said, like, how do you find yourself in Australia? And he took that bus and he took it to the best stop all throughout Victoria. It was the most unbelievable story. And I was amazed at, like, and then sort of at the end, he was sort of like, he goes, "Oh, how was that?" And I'm like, "Mate, that was the most unbelievable story I've ever, like,
Yeah.
I felt like I knew everything about him and his life and I was there with him." It is crazy sitting on the opposite side, hearing someone when they're going through everything and you're just like, it almost leaves you in awe.
It does, man. It absolutely does leave me in awe when I do it. And I feel like it's such a privilege, as I'm sure you feel. It's so cool to be able to have a show where you can talk to someone you don't know and you have the space to just hear from them about whatever it is that's most interesting or most heavy. You can't just go up to someone in the street and start like talking to a random and say, "Hey, tell me about like how your life's been and all this stuff." So we have this incredible opportunity to be able to do that, which I'm massively grateful for, which I think is just, such a special thing to be able to do.
If you look at where the podcast is now, with the awards and the accolades that you've received and thoroughly deserved, and also the type of guests that you've had on, it has come a long way in the 2 years. Obviously that doesn't paint the perfect picture in terms of when it first starts. Talk about the early days and sort of the struggles and everything that sort of happens when you do sort of, jump with, head first into something like this.
Yeah. And the thing is, it hasn't got easier, to be honest. You might not want to hear that.
That's fine.
I think
Nothing I do is easy, mate.
Yeah. Hey, and that's a good sign though, because it means it's worth it. And I think that's what's kept me going throughout, which was that this is a massive challenge, trying to create something out of nothing, like something grassroots and just from the ground up that you believe in. And you might believe in it, but you need other people to believe in it as well. And then it's nice to have an initial burst of motivation, but that's not going to see you through much at all. It's finding out that you're truly passionate, is continuing on and pushing through when you really can't be fucked at all anymore, or there's so many other things going on in your life, or you're up into the early hours of the morning editing some video for some reason that you're doing for free or even paying to do. And after those weeks become months and months and years, and you're still putting in that sort of work, that's only going to happen, I think, if it comes from the right place and you're just truly driven for the right reasons, because it's just too much work otherwise. Like, if you don't really love it and you don't really believe in something, you're not going to get through those periods where you just want to throw in the towel because it's too hard. And the thing for me is, I've always, from early on, seen the impact that it's had on others, and felt the good feeling that that gives me, knowing that I'm contributing something that actually means something to someone else. And that's what's really pushed me through to continue producing content and make me do all that work by myself when I didn't want to. It's not because, oh, I want to get this out there because I want people to see more of me and I want to see how many downloads it can get and stuff. It's always been the person who I did this interview with is expecting to see it, and I know how much them pouring their heart out to me meant to them and how good their story is, and people should see it because people are going to get something out of it. And it's my almost duty to be the one who holds up my end of the bargain and makes that happen. And I've just always found that to be such a strong driving force, where I really felt like the privilege that I have to have this platform and have people come on and tell these stories means that it's really on me to keep producing and keep doing the right thing, and that privilege is earned, not given. And yeah, it's become something that just means enough to me to not quit when I really have wanted to. And it hasn't been easy whatsoever, and it still isn't. We record at a professional studio here in Adelaide, and I pay for that because I think it's worth it. I don't like looking after all the technical stuff. Like, I think there's already enough to worry about when you're hosting, let alone switching cameras. And I know you do it all yourself, but
I'm a one-man show, mate.
There's enough for me. Yeah, that's it. I've done that before, but I pay to use that studio, and I've got a producer called Rory there, and we're sort of business partners in numerous ways as well. And that's been an incredible relationship, and there's no way I'd be where I am with this stuff without him either. So there's a big cost involved in that. There always has been. There's been always a battle to try and find sponsors to keep the show going, because there were periods of time where, I think I paid $15,000 of my own money within the first year of doing it. And that was at a time when just after, but yeah, COVID started happening. I left my job in the news, gave that up, and at one point was unemployed on Centrelink while paying heaps of money still to record this podcast that I was not getting money for, that I'm still not really getting money for. And, even my dad, who's been my biggest supporter and still is with this, I remember having a conversation with him where he was like, so, like, what are you going to do, like, from here? Because you've just given your job away, which was the right call, and he agreed with that. But you're still paying for this podcast, which we think is great. But just because we think it's great and you think it's great doesn't mean that it's going to be something that's going to be sustainable. So, like, how are you going to do this? And I remember really feeling under pressure for that, which I felt numerous times. And then just believing like, something's got to give, and being fortunate enough to have a couple of sponsors throw me enough money to keep it going, keep rolling that along, keep meeting more people. But yeah, as I'm sure you're experiencing yourself, it's nice to do the actual podcast. And this is what we love, being able to have these conversations and be creative. But at a certain point, it has to become a business as well to be able to keep doing it, or to be able to grow the platform and have more of an impact, especially if there's production costs involved. Because yeah, the money's got to come from somewhere, the organization's got to come from somewhere. So I ended up being my own web designer and marketer and promoter, and it quite quickly turned into its own sort of business. And I've been very fortunate along the way to meet people who, because it's a mental health show, it really connects with a lot of people who have their own personal experience, are very touched by it, which is the point. And yeah, have wanted to give up their time for free and their contacts because they believe in it and believe in me, and want it to grow. So it's been a combination of, number one, it meaning more to me than just about anything, which I think was the key driver, based off the pain that I felt losing my friend and finding purpose through pain, which is often the case for people. Not giving up when I've really wanted to because of that reason, and because I've always been optimistic that things will work out if I just keep pushing long enough. And then, having an amazing support network, amazing partner, amazing parents, amazing friends, and then amazing people that I've met along the way who've really wanted to help out and chip in with it. And then just being creative, coming up with different elements of my business, sort of based around the same thing, sort of not, and working out how I can do this and pay the bills. And it's not like I live some fantasy life where I'm some bowling entrepreneur who just does podcasts and like is flexing. I also
You live in Adelaide, mate.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly right. For the last year, I've been working part-time at a health institute as a media officer, which I absolutely love doing. And then I do my business stuff around that. So I'd love to just run my own business one day and just focus on this stuff. But realistically, it doesn't just happen like that either. So I see it as a long game, and it's all been about, at the end of the day, can I keep what I do going, and can I keep producing for long enough that hopefully it just turns into more and more of a thing, so that hopefully I can do it for as long as possible. And that's just been my goal.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's talk about things turning around. You know, I sort of touched on before that you have received some awards and accolades. You were named the best wellbeing podcast at the Australian Podcast Awards, which sounds like that's as pretty much as high as you can go. And you're also a finalist for the South Australian Men's Health Award. Now, you didn't start the project for that sort of thing, but I think it is important to recognize the fact that you are sort of being recognized at that level for what you are producing in this field.
Thanks, man. Yeah, the Australian Podcast Awards, technically it was the silver award, so it was runner up. So I'm not mad.
I was gonna pump your tires regardless, man.
But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like, obviously, you don't start this stuff ever thinking that you're going to get an award or make that a goal. But it has made me proud, and I have been happy to get those accolades, mostly because it does bring some more attention to what you're doing, and it does all play into being able to keep it going and grow your profile. And even if you're someone who's fairly selfless, who doesn't necessarily want the spotlight on them, at the end of the day, we're all competing for attention. We all have the goal of wanting the most amount of people to see what we're doing, so that we know that there's actually a point to doing it and it makes a difference. And yeah, winning awards and stuff does help with that. And it's good to know that it's not just your mum that thinks it's good. Like, people who know think it's good as well. So it's good for that reason. And the Men's Health Awards and stuff's just been great to be able to be recognised, along with so many other incredible initiatives around Australia. There's just a crazy amount of grassroots organisations who are off their own back, putting in so much work, so much time, so much money around working around suicide and men's health, just to try and make a better world for no one other than their community, and getting fuck all funding support a lot of the time, and really having to find time when they all have busy lives and work jobs just because it's the right thing to do and they're passionate about it. And I feel that really strongly, and I'm no different to so many thousands of other people doing amazing things around Australia. And it just feels really good to contribute to something that you can obviously see is tracking in the right direction. Obviously, the suicide numbers are really bad and not going down yet, but I think that's a generational thing that's going to take decades before we see that start to go down, but I think it will. But in terms of the attitude shift that we're seeing in this country, I think it's undeniable that it's so much more acceptable to talk about mental health now. The way that we frame the conversation and the amount of attention on the subject out there is just completely different to what it was certainly 5 years ago. And it just feels great to be part of a wave changing that attitude around society, and hopefully creating a world where our sons grow up and it's even better for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best way that I sort of think of it, or, can see the shift is, we look back, say 5-10 years ago with AFL footballers, I remember there was a North Melbourne player who came out saying he had depression and it was a shock. It was this massive thing. And now you see a large number of, not a large number, but a number of players from, for whatever reasons, they take a month off here or there because, mentally they're not in the best place. And that's finally not at a place where someone will be like, oh shit, he's weak, or it's even back page news. It's slowly becoming more and more accepted, which is incredible because to be honest, like just because someone's good at kicking a football doesn't mean they go through anything different to say you and me on a day-to-day basis. It's probably, it's probably worse given the fact that some of the stuff they get from social media or interactions from people in the street and that. So I think the movement is definitely shifting, and it is really refreshing to see.
Yeah, and sports people, they are the idols of so many, and especially young people, and them being brave enough to speak out about mental health and be examples of what it's like to be human as well as be a star athlete. That's a massive part of shifting the culture, and there's been huge changes in that. And I think you got to credit the clubs as well, not just footy, but lots of other sports who have taken that on and see that it's important, and that treating our mental health like our physical health is the way to go moving forward, and knowing that it's not something you can just ignore, and certainly not something that makes someone lesser or makes them weak. And in fact, the opposite is true. And that's a huge shift, I think. I always say that we're all about trying to show that vulnerability is strength instead of weakness, and being able to admit that you're not perfect and you're not invincible, that you need help, that you can't do it on your own. That's not weakness at all. That's you trying to look after yourself and make yourself the most effective member of society that you can be. And that can be sometimes the hardest thing to do, is admit that you have a problem or you need help or you're struggling. And that takes strength to do that. That's not weakness at all. It's quite the opposite. And I think society is really starting to understand that, even to the point where, if someone was to talk about the fact that they're struggling or come out and speak about an issue that they're having, and someone else was to take the piss out of them, I think most people would be like, what the fuck, man, we don't do that. I mean, I'm pretty biased because I am constantly looking in mental health groups and circles, but I think the majority of people now are really good about mental health and take it seriously and see it very differently, and that's going to continue to grow. So it's awesome to be part of that new wave, because there's no denying that that's absolutely necessary. And with so many challenges for our mental health these days, and so many pressures on us, as there always have been, but increasingly so in various ways, we need coping strategies, and we need to be able to talk, and we need to be able to help each other. And this is just absolutely key, man.
Yeah, couldn't have said it any better myself. You've spoken with, former athletes, army veterans, people who have lost loved ones, people who have battled addictions. Now, I truly believe that you learn something from every single person you interact with, whether that's a positive or a negative. I'd take something out of every interaction I have. How do you feel personally, and what do you sort of take away from, all of these conversations you have from people from different walks of life?
Yeah, you definitely do take something away from every conversation that you have, and it does rub off on you for sure. I notice patterns and similarities between my guests. I try to have on as broad a range of people as possible, because I really want it to be about all young men and tap into all demographics, all backgrounds, all kinds of topics and issues, rather than just people that I'm necessarily comfortable talking with. I want everyone to feel like the show's about them and that we're all in this together. So that's really the point of it all. But I do notice that out of all the different guests that I have on from all these different places, all these different walks of life, everyone at their core has been seeking connection and a large part, and connection and community, and a large part of the problems that we all experience, be it addiction or depression or feeling lost or suicidality, so much of that is caused by feeling a lack of connection, both to ourselves and our inner world, but most of all to each other. And that's what we want as human beings above all else. We want to be able to connect. We want to be able to feel like we can be who we really are without being judged. We want to feel love. We want to love and be loved, and we want to feel like we're useful. We want to have meaning. And when we don't have those things, that's when disaster can really strike, and all those dark, shadowy parts of life can creep in and get their hooks into us. That all sort of stems from that. And I suppose I would already consider that before starting the show, I was compassionate and non-judgmental, but certainly I see that even more clearly now, where you can't judge people for what they've been through or what they might have done that they regret, and you can't think that just because you're different to someone else that you wouldn't sorry, let me rephrase that. You can't think that you're immune to things that other people go through. I mean, sometimes people might look down their nose at someone who's been a drug addict, or someone who's been a drunk, or someone who has depression, and say, oh, well, this person's just weak. They just need to get over it. They made poor decisions. They've done the wrong thing, and that's why they're not further along in life, and they deserve to be where they're at. And really what you learn from what I've had the privilege of doing is that actually we're all only a few steps away from being whoever that is that's in crisis. All it takes is a few major things in your life to go wrong, and you can be that person on the street who's homeless. You can be that person who out of nowhere picks up an addictive issue that becomes extremely destructive. Even if you think you're above it, or that would never affect you because you're too good for it, that's not the reality at all. We're all vulnerable to the world and to life, and that we need to have compassion for each other and everything that we go through, because despite our differences, we're all very similar. We all want the same thing, and we all can go wrong in the similar ways as well. So I think it's that connection is absolutely key. That's what everyone wants. Isolation is a killer, and feeling like you're alone and no one understands you. And meaning as well. We have to have meaning in our lives. We have to find something that is worth not getting fucked up for, that's worth not throwing our lives away for. And people who've managed to turn their lives around in so many of the episodes that I've done, it's been because they've found a good enough reason to do so. They found a good enough reason to live, or to fight back against whatever was holding them down. And often their own health isn't enough. Just wanting to be better yourself in many cases isn't enough. A lot of what I've seen, it's been people who've turned their life around because they have a child that they love more than anything else, or they've become part of a group, or found a higher power. It's a bigger, tapping into a bigger reason and finding meaning in something bigger than yourself that can really bring people back to life and give us a reason to live. So that's something that I see really commonly. And this is all great for me, because every time I'm doing an episode, I find it pretty cathartic and healing and rewarding for me. I also learn a tremendous amount about life in general and my own life. And then hopefully a lot of these things that come out in these conversations, they set themselves in my own mind, and I can hopefully apply most of them to my own life. I still make plenty of mistakes, and doing this show, hearing about people who've fucked things up and then had to work so hard to fix things again, I'm conscious of it. But yeah, I'm still not perfect, and I still make mistakes, and then I'll think back or compare something to something that I heard in a show, and then I realize that I'm behaving in a certain way, and I'll be like, oh fuck. But yeah, it's just that we're all human, man. We can't avoid that we're all human. but we also have a certain amount of control to be able to steer our lives in the right direction, and also that hope's never lost, even if you think it is, even if you're at the lowest low that could ever possibly be and there's no coming back from this. I've talked to plenty of people who've hit that sort of rock bottom and they've all made it back. So hope's the other thing. Yeah.
Sort of going away from this and to sharing something about myself. I, for maybe 10 or 15 years of my life, I convinced myself that the only thing that I could do was work in hockey, and all I wanted to do was live in Canada and, achieve all of these incredibly unachievable things. But I was so brainwashed that, I was this good or whatever that I could. And I remember getting there, just with this, I hate thinking back on it because I'm like, what the fuck were you thinking? And I got there and I got the biggest reality check ever. And it took me a while to sort of realize that I was like, I've just spent the last 15 years thinking I can do something when I can't. And it was really, really difficult for me to accept that. And I probably took me a good 2 years to really accept that. And that was the lowest point for me. There was a lot of things outside of that contributed. And, I was living overseas with, no family, no friends really. And, working a job, making like $40,000 a year in a city, which, is one of the most expensive cities to live. And I was so miserable. I had no connection with anyone. And I was just, it's only once I got back here where I realized, just how lucky I was to go through that whole experience and sort of come out the other side of it. Because, when you start a job now, a lot of people are like, what's the money? What's the money? Whereas I know I've lived with a pay packet that's $40,000 a year. And so it can teach me to, start something like this where, it's not cheap to put all your money into it and sort of, hope for the best with no guarantees. But there is always light at the end of the tunnel, and it doesn't seem like it in the moments, but it is, when you do come out of it and you do reflect on those moments, it is, so gratifying.
And having that isolation where you're separated from all your friends and family and you're struggling to pay the bills and you don't have that connection and you're lonely and you're not living up to whatever you thought was going to happen. And then that directly cuts down your identity because you condition yourself to think that you are this version of this person. And if you don't live up to that, then what are you? And you're trying to answer that question as well. So you've experienced so many of those feelings that so many of us experience that lead to some really dangerous stuff or that we really struggle with. And that doesn't mean that that we need to avoid those things, because I think you probably agree that living through that experience has partly made you who you are and that you wouldn't change it despite how hard it was. Yeah, man. And I've felt the same. Like, I'm partly so passionate about doing the podcast and have so much to say because I am also a young person living life, going through things, trying to establish themselves, having experiences, having doubts, having insecurities. And I want answers just as much as anyone else. And I don't have them all. And I think if we can talk to each other, then we can start to piece things together and figure it out as we go along. But doing it all on your own is just a whole other beast, and it's just not the way to go. And yeah, I've been isolated myself before, similar thing, not much money, experience what it's like to not have that connection and have that isolation instead. And a whole range of feelings that I talk about in the podcast. And I know that it's relevant to everyone because it's relevant to me and it's relevant to people that come on. And yeah, the more you do, the more you realize that not only are you not alone, you're pretty much all together, really. Like, just about, whether they're willing to admit it to you or not, just about everyone has felt like you've felt before at some point in time. And these sort of shows are just about putting examples out there so you can fully see that and know that. But it's absolutely true. And the key is being able to make it through those times and not asking for a life where we don't go through hard times. We want it to be easy and comfortable, because that's not actually going to make us feel fulfilled or make us feel happy. We should want a challenging life where it's difficult to achieve certain things, but those things are worth it to us. And I think that's where we derive meaning from and satisfaction. And that's what we actually want. And that those things are probably tied to greater connection and greater impact on others. So that's that classic, you don't want a lighter load. You want stronger shoulders to carry it on, as long as it's means enough to you. And what I learned from doing a job that I, in the end, didn't believe in and didn't want to do anymore, didn't see the value in, which is, no matter what you do, you can work hard all you like and it won't be a problem. You won't have an issue with it, but you can't work hard doing something that you don't believe in, that you don't derive any value from, because I think that that's the definition of soul destroying, and that a lot of people, unfortunately, feel that they're forced to do that.
Yeah, no, well said. This is going to be a question that's mainly for me, because I'm such a massive fan of the way you interview people. And, there is a handful of podcasts and podcasters who I listen to who do such a great job with the way they interact with people and sort of get people to feel comfortable and open to share. Talk about how you approach an episode. We've sort of touched on the fact that a lot of it is you sort of getting people to relive some of these dark moments, which isn't always easy. How do you get people comfortable, and how do you gauge each episode while you're in it?
Well, those are my secrets, man. So next.
Shit.
Well, you're great at it yourself, but so probably won't be telling you anything new. But I suppose it is a talent to be able to hopefully make someone comfortable in an instant who you've never met, because it's pretty nerve-wracking for people to, especially get on camera and talk about, in some cases, the worst things that they've ever done, or certainly the most painful things that they've ever been through. It's a pretty full-on sort of experience in itself. So I think a big part of it is choosing the right people in the first place. Like I always, it's very important to get people on the show who are ready to tell their story. I think that's a massive part of it, especially talking about mental health stuff. You don't want to do harm. You don't want to have someone on who isn't ready to be there and it's going to have a negative effect on them. So always vetting to make sure you're getting people on who are confident in speaking about it, and it's going to do good and it's not going to do bad. And then they know why they're there in the first place to talk about this stuff. So they're not going to feel affronted or be shocked that you want to get into that sort of thing. But then, yes, starting off wherever's relevant to that person's story, and not necessarily the hardest stuff straight away, but just making people feel comfortable. If you want to talk about techniques, I guess something that I consciously do now, but have always done unconsciously, is you hear someone's answer and then basically shoot it back to them in your own words. It's always something that I've done, but realizing that goes a long way to making people feel more relaxed and feel like they're actually making sense and they're being understood. So yeah, if I'm being told a story and someone's sort of giving me an inkling of the impact that had, and I'll say, all right, so it seems like that would have made you feel this way, and that must have felt like this and this. And then that person will go, yeah, it was a lot like that, and be encouraged to then take it further from there. So that's sort of a classic one. But I think people get more confident as the podcast goes on. So sort of don't start off too hard while people are a bit nervous, and yeah, just coax people into it. Make sure you're asking questions that have open answers, and you're not getting like yes or no answers. But yeah, it's mostly on the guests to make it a good show, and then I guess it's just you have a natural ability to ask the flow on question. And the thought that I always have in my head is, what does the audience want to hear? Like if I was listening to this, I listen to lots of podcasts. What question am I there sitting going, all right, ask this because I want to know more about that. So if I've got my interview plan and we're going one way, and then they say something really interesting that I hadn't had in my plan, but it's worth discussing. I'm not just going to skip ahead to the next question or go down that tangent for a bit because, that sounds really interesting. And that comes from, I remember my mum used to get pissed off because she'd be watching the news and the journalist wouldn't ask the question that everyone wanted to know the answer to. And she'd be like, bloody hell, like, why wouldn't you ask that? And I've always got that thought in my head when I'm interviewing, like, what do people want to hear next? What's going to get this person's story out in the most interesting way?
I think that is very, very relevant to what we're experiencing now with every single press conference we watch every day, regardless of what state you're in.
Exactly. And at least now you can see the live feed of people typing in going like, these journalists fucking idiots, ask this, ask that. But also, I guess the general public doesn't know that journalists have a pretty tough job as well in that regard. And often it's they're just asking whatever their producers tell them to ask. So take it a little bit easy on some of the journalists as well. But I don't think people will.
No, they won't. But we all work for someone at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's it.
Talk about moving forward for the podcast and the media business. I know you said that, one day you want to, run your own business sort of full time. What's sort of next for you and sort of how you can keep being as impactful as possible in this space?
Yeah, I don't fully know the answer to that. It's sort of a bit of a riding by your coattails kind of a vibe to it. So yeah. I've got a number of things that I think could go somewhere that I'm excited about, but they're sort of slow burn type projects where, like, who knows if that's actually going to work out or not. But yeah, I suppose I sort of think I'm still in my 20s and I'm lucky to have found something that I'm super passionate about and just all for giving it an absolute crack, whatever that means, and letting the chips sort of fall where they may. And if it doesn't work out, I want to at least be able to say, oh, well, I gave it everything and I really tried to make something happen, and just give myself that opportunity. And I've been fortunate with my part-time job situation to be in a space where I can give that some more time. So I guess with the podcast, it's to, same as you, keep it going, keep it growing, make more and more connections locally here so more and more people know about it, and then nationally and internationally. And that's just because the number one goal is always to reach more people with it, not only so I have a better chance of keeping it going, but so more people can hear a message that I genuinely think is important and we can continue to influence culture in the way that I set out to. So that's that. I never really expect to make big dollars off the podcast. That'd be nice. I'm sure none of us would say no. I'd love to be
I wouldn't say that. The American Express bill is it's backing up.
Yeah, I know, man. I feel you. That'd be killer to get paid enough to just do podcasting. That'd be an absolute dream, but I'm certainly not relying on that. I just need that to be sustainable. So, I go for grants and try to make those relationships with businesses and anyone who believes in the cause to try and keep it going. But that's a bit of a constant battle, which I'm willing to keep waging. And then there's some other stuff. So also make some mini documentaries, made a couple of those with my podcast producer, who's also a cameraman, used to work together at 7 News. So we do some work together around that. So that's short stories about inspiring people. We've done some with schools where it's similar to the podcast, but it's like a full movie style story where we get in depth telling someone's story, perhaps who wouldn't normally be in the spotlight, and showing like what an amazing person this is. One of the examples was a girl who is disabled after a car accident, and we made a movie about her showing how incredibly resilient she is, all the things she can still do despite her injury, her attitude, and that was a really healing thing to put together for the whole school community. So I absolutely love doing that kind of work because, again, it's storytelling, but you get to take your time with it, go into depth, and you get to feel like you have a real impact with what you can create. So wanting to find more and more of those sorts of opportunities. We're teaching podcasting now to schools. We're just about to start doing that. So at the studio pod booth, my producer and I are now offering crash courses in podcasting for schools to be able to teach teachers to then teach their students, because more and more schools want to use podcasting, instead of PowerPoints and across a whole range of subjects, but they might not know how to actually use that equipment, how podcasts work, everything like that. So we've packaged that up to start teaching that to schools, which we're really excited about. Then also working with a psychology practice here in Adelaide and a men's health centre here in Adelaide on a program for senior school boys about positive mental health and masculinity and self-awareness, which we're working on developing to hopefully start delivering next year as well. So that's sort of taking it further than just the podcast and trying to have that in-person impact and turn it into more of a well-rounded sort of business that can be, realistic and sustainable. So there's those two sort of big projects that hopefully come off, and the podcast keeps growing and things keep tracking along. But I'd be lying if I said that I have any real idea of where it's going to go. I'm sort of just putting heaps of effort into it and being positive and giving it a good red hot go. But we'll see what happens.
That's it. That's all incredible stuff, mate. And that's all you can do at the end of the day. Callum, you're an absolute star, mate. For those people who don't know about your platform or your social media, where can we find you?
Thanks, man. Young Blood Men's Health Matters on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, on Young Blood Media on LinkedIn, Young Blood Media on YouTube. And like you, we do video podcasts for every episode. So you can watch the video or you can get the audio wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, wherever you get it. I've got over 60 episodes up there now with people from all over Australia. So many incredible stories. It's for young men, but it's also really relevant to women because you can learn about the sons, brothers, your partners. So we really make it for everyone, and someone can get something out of everyone can get something out of it pretty much. So go follow, check it out. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think, share it with someone who you think needs it. Would love to have you follow along. So thanks for having me on, bro.
No, thanks for coming on, mate. It was an absolute pleasure, and you absolutely knocked every question I threw at you out of the park.
Brilliant. There you go. I'm pleased to hear that. I gave it a good crack, but it's certainly tougher being the guest, having to come up with the answers. So I think I'll prefer being back in your chair for the next one.
I'll let you go then.